It's the best time of year for our content because we're working on something fun, and that's the best and worst of shows. There's a lot of worst ofs this year. They involve fire, but there's also a lot of really good cases. So we're going to start with the best and worst cases of 2021 as you ramp into building a PC potentially for end of year holidays or whatever else, and hopefully this can help you choose a new PC case for your upcoming build, or just laugh at the really, really bad ones. Those are good too. Before that, this video is brought to you by ASUS and the ROG Crosshair 8 series of X570 motherboards for AMD. ASUS has both the Crosshair 8 Hero Dark and the Crosshair 8 Extreme available, offering high-end motherboards for high core count AMD systems. We've used the Crosshair series for years, for everything from basic overclocking up to liquid nitrogen overclocking, and we found them easy to work with, particularly for their extremely well-organized BIOS menus. Learn more at the link in the description below. So we're following the same format for this year as in previous years. We're going to be looking at a best overall, best thermals, some of the worst cases, worst trends, best mechanical design, noise levels, all of that stuff. And we have a mix of both hard objective data with hundreds of rows in our case reviews spreadsheet now with all different types of configurations and cases. And we'll also be using subjective notes. There are a few hard winners in those categories as well. And for each winner, we have a GN award sphere. We've always done award cubes over the last few years, but now we've advanced. We can have more polygons in our design if it were a 3D shape, which it is. We have two sizes of award crystals. We'll be contacting the winners for these. I guess we won't contact the ones who won. We could ask the ones who won the worst of awards if they'd like an award to commemorate the worst of, but that's probably offensive. So we'll contact the winners in the best categories, the most complimentary ones, and ask them if they'd like to receive one of our award spheres. And if you'd like to get one the easy way, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net and grab one. These are really cool. They're brand new launch. We have a crystal base with the GN logo in it, and then we also have in the sphere itself computer components. So if you look at the design, there's intricacy all the way down to the screws in a teardown design of a computer that go into a radiator tray, some fans. We have the case itself. We've got fans mounted to the case. There's a GPU that's torn down so you can see the shroud. It supports us, what we do, and funds our ability to review things and make videos like this one and all the dozens of videos that led to this one this year. So getting into it then, we covered some of our early favorites in the beginning of this year, mostly focused on airflow, but we also talked about a few categories like mechanical design. That has advanced significantly in the last few months though, as more cases have come to market, and some of them really good. So as usual, we'll have links in the description below to all of the cases we've looked at for the in-depth reviews individually. We'll also have our case reviews playlist and links to each of these cases as they can be found on retailers online. Let's get started with the best cases. We're starting with best overall. This category is a combination of thermal performance, which we can measure objectively, and our opinion on the best design. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who saw a review of it, but the Fractal Torrent takes best overall award this year. The case easily takes best overall for its combination of excellent thermal performance, high build quality and high materials quality, and a more interesting appearance than the boxy Define series rectangles that make up the bulk of Fractal's lineup. This is a company experimenting and doing something outside of its comfort zone and mostly succeeding with it, with the mostly being something we'll talk about in a moment. First off, thermals. The two 180mm front intake fans and three 140mm bottom intake fans stray far from the careful balance of cooling performance and manufacturing costs that we're used to seeing in PC cases. The Torrent is pretty expensive at $190 to $200, but Fractal put that money into these fans. These aren't disposable, free case fans. They're fans that you should be finding a way to actually use if you buy the case. As a side note, the Torrent is one of the only cases we're covering today that's still available for its original MSRP. Given logistics cost increases, this is a rare sight for cases today. In baseline torture testing, the average CPU temperature was 41 degrees above ambient, an all-time best for a chart that includes nearing 400 rows of case configurations and entries, although we only show a truncated version here. The average GPU temperature of 50 degrees didn't set any records, but it still put the Torrent near the top of the chart. Fully covering the bottom of the case in intake fans is a big plus, it turns out, for air-cooled GPU thermal performance. The Torrent is therefore an excellent case for air cooling, but that comes with some trade-offs, namely lackluster radiator support and fewer drive mounts than to be expected in such a large case. And also just fewer radiators that make sense with these fans anyway. For water cooling builds, the 180mm fans are mostly wasted unless using one of the very few uniquely shaped radiators on the market, like the Alphacool ones. As for the design, the Torrent takes an old-school approach and shifts the power supply to the top of the case, leaving the bottom wide open for fan mounts. The top cover of the case is removable for easy power supply access, and there's a line of Velcro loops for neatly routing the external power cable. Of course, we can't give this award to Fractal and the Torrent without also mentioning the dangerous design flaw that affected the original production run. Like the NZXT H1, which we'll come back to later in this review, a poorly designed PCB, that'd be the fan controller in this instance, had a 12-volt power plane at surface level without sufficient clearance around screw holes. So damage during assembly could lead to the controller shorting. This affected all units. Fractal, however, did an excellent job at responding quickly and openly, and it recalled all units. It even pulled them back to its own warehouse, where it replaced the fan controllers. Still, we urge all of you to continue to hold case manufacturers to high standards. Not catching on fire is preferable to responding really well to catching on fire. Best mechanical design is a category we created because cases that are cleverly designed, well made, or just plain cool don't necessarily get recognized in categories like best thermals. Catching on fire is a disqualifying element in this one. We gave this award to the Silent Bass 802 earlier, and we stand by that decision. Be Quiet's attention to detail with features like the swappable front panel and sliding fan tray is meticulous as always, and the process for inverting the case and mounting the motherboard upside down has been refined since the days of the painfully complicated Dark Base Pro 900. As we've just explained, the criteria for this are flexible. In this instance, it goes to the 802 because Be Quiet added a lot of manufacturing complexity to improve user experience. Making an invertible case with swappable front panels and lots of small parts doesn't make the 802 easier to produce, but it does make it a better case, and it doesn't fumble all of this like the Odyssey X does. Thermal performance was middling for the 802, which is why it doesn't get one of the other awards. We recommend using the mesh panels and keeping the case as open as possible. The level of noise damping actually offered by sealed panels isn't worth the trade-off, and you could achieve similar noise levels just by running the mesh panels and reducing the fan speed on that variant, especially because the solid panel impedes flow and necessitates higher speeds anyway, which negates its advantages. Mechanically though, we really liked the 802. It feels good to work with, the materials quality is good, it's well engineered and built, and so it easily wins this award. We also, however, want to recognize the Lian 011 Air Mini here. The Air Mini is an improvement on the 011D Mini, with better support for ATX components and ventilated panels. The mechanical design feature that stands out is the ability to shift the entire motherboard tray down, eliminating some PCIe slot capacity and reducing motherboard compatibility to SFF, but adding a ton of space at the top of the case for radiator support and fan clearance. Best budget cases is next. For the Best Budget Case Award, we consider cases roughly between $50 and $70. Most of the brand new cases below that point use ancient tooling and cheap plastic, and cheap steel, and cheap fans, and lots of other things are really not well made in cases below the $50 point. The upper end of our price range has drifted higher with hardware prices in general. For example, we named the P360A as an early favorite for this category, which originally had a $60 MSRP. It now sells for $80. That eliminates it from the running, unfortunately for Fantex. And also, it's a terrible $80 case when it was an okay $60 case, so it eliminates it in general from consideration. The Montech X3 Mesh is currently $64 on Newegg, and this is the best of two we've looked at from Montech, with the company running a 50-50 hit rate in our reviews right now. This isn't some miracle, but the Montech X3 Mesh is a cheap-ass case with cheap-ass parts, but not so cheap-ass that it becomes weak-ass, which is a different category. Most user reviews boil down to, but it's cheap. 4 stars. Thermal performance is excellent for the price thanks to the 6 stock fans, 3 front intake, 2 top exhaust, and 1 rear exhaust. In a torture test, the X3 averaged 47 degrees above ambient on the CPU and 52 degrees above ambient on the GPU, around the level of performance of the more than twice as expensive H500P Mesh. So this is a strong candidate for budget builds where every cent really counts. It's better than most of the $26 cases that feel like they're one bump away from falling apart. It's decent in performance, and overall we'd call it fine. That's enough for a budget case. The stock fans make air cooling practical without purchasing any extra fans at all, but at a price that competes with even DIY PC's bargain basement offerings, which is all of DIY PC's offerings. The shade is plenty in this video, but there won't be much shade for this category because it's for best small form factor case. This is a tricky one to award when the only SFF enclosures we've really looked at in depth in the past year have been the iBuyPower Height Revolt 3 and the Lian O11 Air Mini. We liked the O11 Air Mini, but it's large enough to fit ATX components, and therefore it's not really small form factor. It's sort of cheating its way into this category. We're actively using the Revolt 3 to house a portable system, but its immense weight and the fact that the I/O is on the bottom of the case have made it a lot less handy than our old Lian TU100 lunchbox that we were using before. Our favorite small enclosure we've worked with, that we've really gotten hands-on with in the past year, has been the Cooler Master NR200P. The NR200P came up in our 2020 Case Awards as best case we're currently in the process of testing, and although we never published a full review for it, we did end up liking it. Our current verdict is the NR200P is as small as possible without being a complete pain in the ass to build in. We recently built a small form factor machine in our NR200P and found it easy to work with and thermally competent. The case technically supports up to a 330mm triple slot GPU and a 280mm radiator, but we'd recommend aiming below that to leave some breathing room. Even so, it's surprisingly generous in compatibility for such a small case. We also want to mention the SSUPD Meshlicious, which has one of the grossest names we've ever had to say for a case. SUPD is a sister company to Lian, and thus far has released an all-mesh tower style small form factor case and nothing else. Unlike the H1 and the Revolt 3, I/O is on the rear of the case, as it should be. We haven't gotten one yet because we're still not doing SFF reviews on a regular basis, but we like the idea, we've looked at it, and customer reception seems positive. So we wanted to mention this with the asterisk that we haven't formally reviewed it. The case is a few months old, and it's currently on sale for $110 with the less expensive PCIe Gen 3 riser cable option. Best out-of-the-box thermals is next, which we're giving again to the Fractal Torrent, but there was a fierce competitor for most of this year. At the beginning of this year, we gave best out-of-the-box thermals to Lian's Lancool 2 Mesh for performance. There were a few variations of this one, so if you're looking at it specifically, look for the Lancool 2 Mesh performance one, not the original Lancool 2, which we weren't that impressed with. With a CPU average of 45 degrees, which was only just barely beaten by the Fractal Torrent recently, it was nearly a chart topper. The GPU average of 49 degrees also put it in close competition with the best competitors. Although it doesn't top the chart technically in either category, it remains one of the best results in both. The case is also much cheaper than the Torrent, making it a great option as a fallback for people who have a more sane budget to spend on the case. The design isn't anything fancy here. The Lancool 2 Mesh has two 140mm intake fans and one 120mm rear exhaust fan to create a simple yet very effective airflow pattern because the panel design is also effective and matches well with the fan layout. We published our review of the case more than a year ago now, and it seems to have sold well, so finding good in-stock listings for the performance model at the reasonable price has become tricky. It is, however, still made, and it's still sold. And because cases don't go bad, it still lands on our list. As we covered in the first category, the Fractal Torrent is the deserved winner, the new winner in this category. Average GPU temperature in the torture test was just over 1 degree warmer in the Torrent, but the CPU average was significantly lower at 41 degrees. That's why we have multiple tests though, like best noise levels. Despite the name, best noise levels is a category where we have to use some editorial discretion rather than just purely looking at numbers. We take noise measurements in a standard way, but it's with stock fans at 100% speed. We lock the other fan speeds. The default winner of this category would inevitably be a case like the Masterframe 700, which has no stock fans, or the Lian Odyssey X, which is terrible and has no stock fans. We hated one of those cases and we strongly disliked the other, and you can use your imagination on which is which. We aren't giving this award then to either of those cases because we prefer to give complimentary awards to cases that we don't hate, like the Corsair 4000D Airflow and the Be Quiet 500DX. Earlier this year, we highlighted the newer 5000D non-airflow as a contender for this category as well, but the former cases achieved better thermal results at approximately the same noise level. 37.4 dBA for the 4000D Airflow and 37.6, which is within error, for the 500DX. We also do noise-normalized thermals, but we'll talk about that next. The 4000D is a good case, and it marked a strong return to cases and not sucking at them for Corsair, which had a number of misses in the last few years. Typically, we like to highlight newer cases in these roundups, but both cases are still available. They're still on sale for about $100, and nothing we've seen in the past year has unseated them. And again, a case doesn't really age that much. It doesn't have an expiration date. So as long as it's still being sold, we're fine with including it in a new roundup. We still wish the 4000D came with more stock fans, but the fact that it doesn't is what helped it stay so quiet in our testing. Similarly, the 500DX's fans aren't powerful, but their relatively low speed makes them quiet. In stock testing, both cases performed almost identically, keeping noise levels impressively low while maintaining acceptable CPU and GPU temperatures. Best noise-normalized thermals is a separate category from the previous two for a reason. Good cooling and low noise levels can sometimes be a direct trade-off. The best cooled cases with many stock fans can be noisy, and the quietest with sealed-off panels can be poorly cooled. Striking a balance between the two is what makes a case exceptional. In a straight-up numbers contest, the Lian Lancool 215 still sits at the top of this chart. The big 200mm intake fans and open mesh of the front panel allow it to move large volumes of air at low RPMs. That keeps the noise level down while maintaining an average CPU temperature of 47 degrees above ambient under full load and a GPU temperature of 53 degrees above ambient. We frequently see open mesh-fronted cases outperform sealed-off silence-focused cases in this test because the fans in the open cases can afford to spin slower while maintaining good thermals. The Lancool 215 is still available, but its price has risen from its original target, MSRP of $70 a year ago, to a current price of $100. We do like the 215 and it does perform well, but keep in mind that it's a budget case at heart. The materials and construction are in line with the original $70 price point. That's part of why we favored the Fractal Mesh Phi 2 in this category earlier this year. Our next category is for the worst case and worst trend. Worst case is normally hard to award since there are just so many contenders. In the past, we've remedied this by picking a worst trend instead of a single case. This year, we're doing both. We're going to have the
extreme worst case category
and the traditional worst case category, because otherwise we'd have to introduce a weighted scale to ensure it remains a fair competition for more traditionally bad cases, namely ones which won't kill you in your sleep. The
extreme worst case
is easily the NZXT H1, and the worst trend is cases catching on fire, since both the H1 and the Torrent were capable of doing it. The difference, again, is that Fractal remedied its issue transparently and swiftly, while NZXT left it to clear the market and hoped no one would die in a fire while they worked at a sloth's pace to eventually half-ass fix a problem severe enough that GN got the US Consumer Protection Agency involved because we were worried someone might actually die, resultant of NZXT's low-effort pseudo-fixes. In its effort to unfuck the case, NZXT noted an undisclosed hazard in late 2020 before shipping some plastic screws to bypass the problem rather than properly fixing it and getting it out of the channel. The problem, as a reminder, was the PCB shorting to ground and igniting with the energy of pyrotechnics at a Slipknot show, and that was generally regarded as a bad thing in a computer. We had to put the fire out ourselves, since it didn't fizzle like it should. The company then shipped some screws out, but slowly, and with countless threads on Reddit and Twitter about waiting weeks to months to receive a simple pack of 2 nylon screws that didn't fix the problem anyway. NZXT eventually fixed the problem, but it shipped 2 versions of a new PCB. And so after the company earned some of our trust, it torched it all, much like its own riser cable, when we saw a continual flow of alternative solutions to a severe problem. On a less severe side, we have another worst case, except for more traditional reasons. MSI's MPG Secura 500X was a masterful combination of a traditionally bad case, its 20 kilograms of over-engineered, expensive components, and 4 stock 200mm fans on the one hand, and absolutely zero airflow on the other. CPU thermals in particular were abysmal, especially given the $250 price tag. This system throttles while being $250 and having that many fans. On MSI's side of things, the amount of money and effort that went into building a case this bad and making it suck so hard is impressive, and may even be unsurpassable by competition in following years. If we combined this case with the NZXT H1, it might actually suffocate oxygen enough to put the fire out. We managed to improve things a little bit by slapping Corsair's novelty 500mm case fan on the side instead of the stock tempered glass panel, so maybe MSI can take that input and come back with an airflow model next year. Cooler Master's Masterframe 700 and Lian Li's Odyssey X together form our worst trend for this year. And that'd be transforming cases. These 2 cases together are the Voltron of bad ideas. For most people, the point of a case is to put a computer in it and basically stop thinking about it until a filter gets clogged. There isn't much demand for cases that can be taken apart and reassembled differently at a whim, and if anyone does want that, they should probably go ahead and buy 2 cases. The Masterframe 700 and the Odyssey X are bulky, they're expensive, with one of them at $500, and they're less useful in each of their transformed states than a regular non-transforming case would be. We're all for case manufacturers coming up with experimental designs, but these are both whiffs. Honorable mention for worst trend goes to charging more for airflow versions of the same case that came out many years ago. This hasn't gotten completely out of control yet, but it's on the way. We hope NZXT's H510 Flow isn't an indication of things to come. We understand supply and demand, but that doesn't make it any more fun to see a manufacturer brazenly increasing the price for a feature that doesn't cost them extra money. We get enough of that from Intel's K-SKU CPUs. Thank you very much. And this trend already feels like a big F SKU. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, get behind the scenes videos, and otherwise. If you'd like to see any of the cases in full detail in their individual reviews, they're in the description in the case reviews playlist. And we'll have a lot more best and worst lists coming up over the next few weeks. So make sure you subscribe to catch those. Thank you for watching. We'll see you all next time.